Good evening, everyone. And tonight we have another episode of I Have Such Sights to Show You. And for tonight's Hellraiser themed episode, we're going to be discussing Hellbound Hellraiser 2, perhaps one of the greatest horror sequels ever made. So, in doing so, So, sorry about that. I had a brief little pause there. I thought it'd be a good month to discuss Hellraiser 2. After all, it is December. And Hellraiser 2, of course, came out on December 23rd, 1988. So I've heard, yeah, why not? And, last month I had done in-depth review of the first Hellraiser film. So I thought I would do this same, only this time with part two of the series. And one thing I've always liked about the second one, it's definitely a direct sequel to the first one, but it almost feels like when you watch those first two movies, it's almost like one complete movie. So it's a lot like, say, Halloween and Halloween 2 or Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein in that regards there. And one of my earliest moments of Hellbound Hellraiser 2 was seeing it, getting a chance to see it in the theaters, albeit through some interesting way of doing that. I was 14 at the time, and I knew my dad was not going to take me to go see it. So it was like a few days, I think, after Christmas. So I'm in the mall. I've got some extra Christmas money, and I decided, well, I'm going to give this a shot. I've been excited to see this movie for a few months now. When I first saw the trailer for it, when I went and saw Halloween 4 in the theater back in October of '88, and of course, I'd read a little bit about it. Fangoria had a article on it in one of their magazines, but for some reason, whereas I knew I wasn't going to get carded for Halloween 4, lucked out, I had a feeling I would get. They'd ask for my ID if I went and just went up there. So what I did is I went and bought a ticket to probably a Christmas movie, and I seem to remember it might have been Scrooged with Bill Murray, movie that I had already seen earlier that month and really liked. But I decided, well, I went into that theater, waited a few minutes, and just kind of snuck in right in time for Hellraiser 2 to start. And needless to say, I was not disappointed. With Hellraiser 2, you have a lot of the same people that were involved in the first one. Had a new director. Clive Barker decided not to direct part two because he was getting ready to get work on and prepping for directing Nightbreed. So they brought in a young, he was actually a studio executive by the name of Tony Randall, came in to direct the first, direct Hellraiser 2. And Peter Atkins, who had been friends with Clive Barker, wrote the screenplay. Barker still remained as the executive producer of the film and also did a lot of consulting on the script and on the movie itself. So he was still active during the making of the film. It was shot in England, much like the first film was. So yeah, and then you had a lot of returning characters. We get the return of Claire Higgins as Julia, Ashley Lawrence as Kirsty. We also, of course, get the Cenobites back. Mainly Doug Bradley as Pinhead. The only real change was originally it was Grace Kirby who played the female Cenobite. For whatever reason, she decided not to return for the second, so they did recast the female Cenobite, and that ended up being Barbie Wilde. Also, Oliver Smith, who plays the skinless Frank in the first film, he also returns, and Sean Chapman as Frank, he also returns to the film. Not coming back was Andrew Robinson, and as it's been, from what I understand, he just didn't. They did originally write him in, or were going to, but he decided to decline. Kind of figured that his character had there was nothing more for him to do with that character in the second film. Um, and as Peter Atkins, the screenwriter, said, he was actually kind of relieved because to him it would have made no sense for Larry to be in hell because he didn't open the box. He wasn't an evil man or anything like that. So there's no reason for him to be in hell in the first place. So that was the least the background from what I've heard regarding why Andrew Robinson didn't come back to play Larry. We also get some new characters. We get Kenneth Cranham, who plays Dr. Chenard, who has his own mental institute. We also get his young protege, Kyle, played by William Hope, who many of you would know from Aliens. He played the character of Lieutenant Gorman in Aliens. And also, we get a young actress at the time, Imogene Borman, who plays Tiffany and serves as kind of a good friend to Kirsty, or becomes one anyway, throughout the course of the movie. All the practical effects artists were back that were on the first film, came back for the second film, and that's something the second film once again has some really good gruesome practical effects, very gory in some of the scenes, and we'll talk about some of them. So figured I'd go ahead and give kind of like a rundown a little bit of what the story is. The story pretty much takes place right after or shortly after the first movie ends. We first get a little bit of a backstory. The movie starts off before the credits, gives like a little bit of a recap of what happened at the end of Hellraiser. And then we have credits, and then we get a little backstory to, we see this World War One military guy, a captain. We see him purchase the box. We don't know who he is at the time, but as he opens the box, of course, all hell breaks loose, and we see that it is the human version of Pinhead before he becomes Pinhead, because we see the transformation. So right there off beginning, we now know that the Cenobites were once human. So we get that little bit of a background, and that is Doug Bradley playing himself on screen, playing the character of Captain Elliot Spencer, who is the World War One captain who opens the box, and the Leviathan decides to make him into Pinhead. So we get that, and then Kirsty wakes up in a mental hospital, and this is where there's some where I have a few questions. Is how did she get there in the first place? When we look at the end of the first film, and we're of course led to believe that the old house in the first film fell apart on itself and all that, but actually it's still pretty intact in the second one. So a minor thing really, and we see a lot of that happen with sequels. Sometimes there's a few little continuity um, issues, but it's one of those things we overlook. We're not sure why she's in the hospital, because there's a detective there wanting to question her about what happened and all this. And of course, she tells him what happened, and of course, doesn't believe her, because hearing about Cenobites and all that stuff, and that can't all be real. But what's weird is she asked for her boyfriend from the first film, Steve, and he goes, "Oh, we sent him home hours ago. He had some story to tell." Well, if it's the same story that what Kirsty said, why'd you send him home, and why are you keeping her in the institute? Was once again one of those things. I think they just wrote that in there just to get rid of that character, because it wasn't much use in the first film. So just to kind of like, they just wrote that in there. But going forward, Kirsty finds out that she's in a mental institute run by a guy by the name of Dr. Chenard, and he has his assistant named Kyle, as I talked about earlier, played by William Hope. And he's trying to get the bottom of it. He questions Kirsty and examines her. And, once again, we get a little bit of a recap of Kirsty explaining things to Chenard as far as what happened. And we don't know this at the time, but Chenard's actually secretly has a obsession with the puzzle box, an obsession with the Leviathan, which we find out is basically a lord of hell who runs a labyrinth, which we would assume is a separate corner of hell. So he's like really into the mythology. He has books about the Cenobites and all this stuff. So when he hears how Frank came back, from a drop of blood where his corpse was, he arranged to have the mattress where Julia, where she died in the first one, And what he does is he brings a one of the mental patients at the hospital, who happens to be played by Oliver Smith, who had played the skinless Frank. Well, now, and he thinks this inmate thinks he's delusional. He thinks he's covered with maggots and all this stuff. So you have this very gruesome scene where Chenard gives him a straight razor, and because the patient thinks he's got maggots all over him, starts scraping them off of him, thus making himself bleed, cutting himself. The blood gets on the mattress, and then Julia comes back, sucks all the life out of him. So it's one of those more grotesque scenes that you'll ever see, but the practical effects are amazing in that scene. As a side note, too, Kirsty is seeing images in her hospital room where she sees the skinless corpse that she believes is her father. And there's a written in blood right above the body is "I'm in hell, help me." So she thinks it's her father. So she thinks maybe I can somehow get to hell and save him and bring him back. During this time, she meets another patient there named Tiffany, who Kyle explains is just wandered into the facility. They didn't know her name, so because she can't speak, and she just has this thing about solving puzzles, which of course comes into play later on. Kyle also witnesses Julia's resurrection and is, of course, horrified by this. He's, of course, witnesses from afar. No one detects him, and he immediately does tell Kirsty because now he believes Kirsty's story because he's seen it firsthand. And so now Kirsty's like, well, we got to get there and stop them from this happening, which he helps. So this is one thing Kirsty has. She actually gets some competent help in this movie, and both in the form of Kyle and Tiffany eventually. You know, Chenard basically wants to resurrect Julia back. He's bringing her other mental patients, and she's feeding on them so she can fully recover and become, at least look human. And he basically strikes a deal with them. I'll get you reformed, but you're going to help me get into the other side through the box. Because Chenard, you know, like Frank, is a psychopath, but unlike Frank, where Frank was just wanting to find the ultimate experience of pain and pleasure, Chenard, who has this obsession, wants to know what's on the other side of that box. And he's totally obsessed with this. So kind of makes a deal with Julia. And that's where Tiffany comes in. He brings Tiffany to his house and has her solve the box. And while him and Julia stand aside in another room watching from afar, and this is where this is not quite halfway point through the movie, but this is where Pinhead and the other Cenobites make themselves known. She conjures them up, which is a really fantastic scene. And the other Cenobites are going to, you know, do their worst on Tiffany, but Pinhead tells them to hold off because, according to their rules, it's not hands that call us, but desire. So they sense that she was a puppet, more or less, being manipulated into open the box. So they leave her alone and they walk back in. Unfortunately, as this is going on, or actually before that scene, as Kirsty and Kyle are in this house, Kyle has a run in with Julia, only he doesn't know it's Julia because now she has all of her skin. And unfortunately, she kills Kyle. And that's when we have this brief little standoff between her and Kirsty. It's a very poetic scene where Julia tells Kirsty, they didn't tell you the rules have changed. I'm no longer just the wicked stepmother. I'm now the evil queen. With that, she knocks out Kirsty, but that's when Chenard comes there and goes, okay, it's my turn. And that's when you have this scene where Tiffany is made to open the puzzle box. So now you have a portal now that has opened permanently, leading straight to hell. And it's basically a big, huge labyrinth. It's not what we, it's not just all fire and people screaming. It's several different rooms and corridors. It's basically one big giant maze. And the Leviathan takes the form of kind of like a diamond shape, which is an alteration of the lament configuration. And, you don't see a whole lot of it. It's just kind of in the background. And they wanted, had they had more of a budget, they wanted to include more stuff like showing souls being turned into Cenobites and all that, but they were a little bit limited on the budget. So some of the special effects, some, I guess, I don't know if you would have called it CGI or not, but they do look a little bit dated, but something for 1988 film you're more than willing to forgive. And so Kirsty, she wakes up and she basically heads down in the labyrinth because she's looking for her father. Instead, where she thinks is his father, it's actually Frank. He's the one that summoned her. And we have this great scene once again between Kirsty and Frank. As I've alluded to, I think because I've always kind of theorized that Frank was probably did something bad to her when she was younger, which is why she's so repulsed by him. Why the term "come to daddy," I think, triggers her a little bit. And of course, Frank wants to have her way with her, but Kirsty kind of turns the tables a little bit and basically turns his little portion of hell into fire, and his skin melts off, and he's back to being skinless Frank. It's a great scene. It's like really my favorite scene of the movie because it's the classic scene of the victim taking power away from her attacker, basically, and kind of ones up Frank, and she kind of stands her ground. And um, first, she makes Frank think that he's going to have her, but instead, with defiance, she tells her, "I'd rather burn." Shortly thereafter, Julia shows up, and she kind of makes it look like she's going to kiss Frank and all that because Frank's like telling her to come here. And she ends up pulling his heart out and killing him, if that's even possible, because I think he's already dead because he is in hell. But she kind of throws an old line back at him saying, "Nothing personal, baby," um, as kind of retribution for him killing her in the prior film. There's a little bit of a standoff between, where Kirsty and Tiffany are being grabbed by Julia, but for some reason another corridor opens, and the it's kind of like a big wind tunnel, and it blows Julia's skin right off of her, and her skinless self goes right back into the depths of hell, I guess. During this time, the puzzle box has turned into like almost like a diamond shape, similar to looking just like the Leviathan. Kirsty does have a standoff with Pinhead in the Cenobites. They tell her that her father's in his own hell and far removed from her, and they pretty much let her go. They pretty much, Pinhead's like, "Yeah, go ahead, explore hell because we have eternity to know your flesh." So they're pretty much just toying with her a little bit. By this time, also, Julia has betrayed Chenard. He's seen what he's wanted to see. He's overcome with all the emotions of being in the labyrinth. He gets flashbacks of all the awful things that he's done, including we see him as a kid like dissecting a dead animal. So that once again kind of lends itself to him being a total psychopath, if you will. And he himself is now, she pushes him into a chamber, and he himself now is being turned into a uh pretty much turned into a mega super Cenobite. And I mean, it's just the most weird, most bizarre thing because now he's chasing after Kirsty and Tiffany. And by this time, Kirsty and Tiffany are working together. Kirsty has become now a protector of Tiffany because she's a little bit younger. And Tiffany has her own deals because it's kind of revealed through imagery and flashbacks that Chenard saw that she had a power for talent for solving puzzles. So shows him someone killing her mother and him committing her and performing brain surgery on him, perhaps to try and turn her mute. So you have that going on. So it's a very crazy design too, because it has this big thing on his head, and his fingers are all crazy, and he has piano wire, what looks to be piano wire strung all over his face, and the scene where he gets back into the hospital and kills all the other inmates in the hospital, and it's kind of funny. And this is like a brief little humorous scene where Kirsty and Tiffany see him for the first time, and Tiffany she mutters her first word, and she's like, "Shit!" Real, and Kirsty looks back, and it's kind of a funny little moment there. Um, but yeah, and then you have a confrontation between the Channard Cenobite versus Pinhead and the other Cenobites. But before he enters the room or the lair or whatever, Pinhead's ready to tear Kirsty apart. But Kirsty has found a photo of the human version of Pinhead and shows it to him, and he stops and he begins to remember that he was once human, as do the other Cenobites. And that's when Channard comes into the room, and they have this kind of a fight scene really between, and I'll talk more about this later as I give my final views on this, but Channard ends up killing off the Cenobites one by one, and as they're being killed, they're all turned back to their human form. And the most disturbing part is when Chatterer is killed. I'll talk more about in a future episode. Eventually, Channard comes back after Tiffany and Kirsty kind of work together as a team because Kirsty puts on Julia's skin. Only Channard does not know it's Julia, so he's like, "Oh, you've come back." Meanwhile, Tiffany solves the box. It turns it back into the cube, which starts closing the doors. It kills Channard as he's decapitated by the Leviathan. We're not really sure why that is, but Kirsty and Tiffany flee hell, get out of the labyrinth, and get back. And then the movie ends with those two walking off into the sunset, leaving the Institute behind. And at the very end, we see one of the same movers from the first film as they're cleaning up Channard's stuff, and this pillar arises. One of the movers is taken and basically cut in half by the blood, and in this pillar, which we'll see again in Hellraiser 3, we do see Pinhead's face on it, basically hinting that Pinhead's going to be back again. So that's Hellbound Hellraiser 2. There's a lot of it that I kind of left out, but that's pretty much the bare bones of it. This is a movie that many people in the fandom would actually prefers a little bit more than the first film. I think it's like a 60-40 split, if I had to guess, of most people preferring the original, but there are plenty that prefer the second film, and I can understand why. For me, it's still a close second, mainly because the one thing that holds this movie back from being better than the first is the scene with the fight between Channard and the other Cenobites. I think that scene was rushed a little bit and ends too quickly. I think that kind of weakens the Cenobites, especially Pinhead, too much. I wish not that Channard couldn't kill them because he's directly linked now to the Leviathan, but I would have liked to seen that fight been a little bit more of an epic showdown than what we got. Once again, I know this movie kind of ran out of money at the end, so that could have been the reason why. But that's the one thing that kind of hurt. I wouldn't say hurts the film, but it takes away from the film, I think, a little bit. That being said, this movie does exactly what you want out of a sequel. You get certainly has a lot of the similar tone and dread from the first one. Maybe not quite throughout. The first movie certainly has a much more claustrophobic feel to it, as 80% of that movie is at the old Cotton House. So it has that dreary sense. You get a little bit of that for sure in the second one. But in this one, you certainly see a big expansion of the mythology. It's a much bigger and grander film, a bit more ambitious because you're now going on into hell now. You're in this giant, grotesque maze with all this crazy shit happening, and It leans into a lot of psychological horror moments as well as the supernatural, so it works really well there. I think the performances once again are terrific by everyone. I think Kenneth Branagh plays an amazing evil psychologist. That's for sure. Claire Higgins is great as Julia, and Ashley Lawrence, I think, really comes in more into her role as Kirsty in this film. In the first, or in the second film, first film she's really good in it, but clearly the first film is very much Julia and Frank's movie, and whereas Julia has a strong role to play in this movie, as does Dr. Chenard, it does feel like the story's centered a little bit more around Kirsty. It's kind of like a thing where, and so therefore her arc I think is completed in this film. Whereas maybe she didn't have quite the arc in the first film. In the second one, she's certainly a much more, I think, stronger character. And it's kind of like with good analogy I could use. It's like Nightmare on Elm Street. I think because obviously the my favorite of the series, and most people would agree, but I think in part three, I think Nancy is a much stronger character in part three because now she has room now to complete more of her arc, and we get a little bit more of her. Same thing with Laurie Strode in Halloween H2O. I think one and two are obviously better movies than H2O is, but I think H2O is probably the strongest version of Laurie that we get. Some people might say Halloween 2018, and that's fine. But like H2O, even though it's a lesser film, it's the best version of the character. And so it's the same thing with Kirsty in this one. She's determined she wants to save her father. That's her main goal. And when she doesn't complete that and realizes she can't save her father, she does have a brief moment of mourning, shall we say, because for the most part throughout the movie, she's just 100% head on, no time to rest, no time to sit back and think about what she's going to do. She's just simply reacting to everything. And it's great to see the dynamic between her and Tiffany. It's almost like they become Batman and Robin, only fighting evil in hell, kind of is the best way of looking at it. Now, I wish going forward we had seen more of that seen another movie with both Kirsty and Tiffany in it, because I think it would have been great to have seen in one of the future sequels, but we didn't. So, overall, whereas I give Hellraiser a 10 out of 10, I kind of give Hellraiser 2 about a 10 out of 10 too. Once again, it kind of, like the first one, it certainly sucks me into the whole movie, and despite a couple of flaws, I can still give it a 10 out of 10. As far as being the best horror sequel, it's kind of tough. I think I would always go with Bride of Frankenstein as being my favorite horror sequel, because that's a movie that I think is better than the first. But and then you also have Halloween 2. So I think those three movies right there are probably your best sequels. You could also say probably Friday the 13th, Chapter 4, because that's my favorite of that series, but that's still a little bit behind. But um, yeah, I think it does everything a sequel should be. It's certainly one of the best 1-2 punches in horror. It's one of those movies where if you watch the first, you have to watch the second to finish it off. Much like, once again, like Halloween or Halloween 2. So yes, so that's my thoughts on Hellraiser 2. I'm not sure what Hellraiser theme I'll do next month when I do the next video, but I'm working on some ideas. I might go straight into Hellraiser 3, or may take a break from analyzing movies and look more into the characters. So everyone, this be the last YouTube video I do for the month of December, and therefore for the year. Of course, last month we did the final episode of Horror Hangouts for season 2. We will be returning with season 3 probably sometime in late January, I hope, and probably be doing like a recap of our favorite movies of 2025 and talk about a lot of other things, what we're looking forward to. So hopefully we'll have another great panel for that. Like I said, I'll be doing another video of of the Hellraiser videos, doing I have such sights to show you, and maybe at some point I'll have a guest on or so to discuss these movies. But tell me in the comments below, what were your thoughts of Hellraiser 2? How do you rank it in the series? Did you like it better than the first, or is the first still your favorite? Uh, and I certainly want to hear your views on the movie as well. You can, and like I said, if you haven't seen Hellraiser 2, I would go back, watch the first one, then watch the second right after that, because they really do make for a complete story in that regards. So, yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching, everyone. Um, and once again, have a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever you celebrate. And we'll see you next year. Good night, everyone.